Every time there's some work to do, it has to go to the supply chain, the futures of the supply chain.
Hello everyone, so welcome to IET ShockSoc's first sort of guest speaker event. We're joined today by three engineers. We've got Paul joining us, Neil and Lewis, which is behind us, joining us virtually today. I think it's best to let you guys introduce yourself really and go from there if you want to talk about yourselves.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll start with Paul first.
Yep. Okay. Right, Lewis, do you want to take your camera off then? Otherwise I'll be looking at you instead of me. Right, okay. Gosh. I'm going to stand at this side because if I stand there, the light's just straight in my face. Okay. Well, I'm Paul. I'm retired now, but I've been in engineering since I was 16. And we're just going to give you 10 or 15 minutes about my career and maybe a couple of bits of advice if you're... I'll give you them anyway, whether you want them. So, okay, well, my career... I retired when I was 57. And I did that because I'd kind of had enough of what I was doing. So I started... My career's been in two halves. I spent 23 years working in the defence industries. And then I spent nearly 20 years working in IT services and telecoms. So I'll tell you a bit about each part. I'll start at the beginning. I've got a theme through my talk, and the theme is about networking and relationships, because there are some things I learned as I got older that I really didn't understand when I was younger. I think I was being a typical technical sort of person. I didn't understand the importance of relationships and networks until I was probably nearly 35 or more. So, anyway, so I went to a secondary modern school. So if you don't know what that is, when I was in education at school, you probably heard of grammar schools, but those people who didn't make it to grammar schools went to secondary modern schools, and that was for people who really weren't going to achieve anything academically. It was for people who were likely to go and work in, around here, chocolate factories or the railway, on the railway. So, I'd been in the Scouts for a long time. Now the link here is networks, that's where I'm coming from. I've been in the Scouts for a long time. I was looking for an apprenticeship. And it turns out, I found out that my Scouts chairman and my Scouts leader both worked at this particular place that I liked the look of. And through my network, they guided me through my application, and I think there was, the typical thing, 300 people applied for the job, and I got one of the 8 jobs. So that's the networking link there, okay? I didn't know it at the time. I thought it was just purely down to my personal greatness that I managed to get a job, but I didn't realise there were hands on my shoulder all the way through that. Now, I chose an apprenticeship. It was basically a telecommunications technician type of apprenticeship. But the organisation that I worked for would send you to university if you could do it. And again, through that process, people were looking at me and they were nudging me onto the conveyor to get me to university. I didn't know what the process was, but they would say, I think you need to go onto this course at college. That was in York. And and then I think you should do an H&D at Leeds. Then I think you should probably go onto the degree course if you can make it. I think you should go on the honours course if you can make it. And that was all paid for. So all the people around me was, living on custard and sleeping in cars, if they had one. And I was still paid my wages, as you would have called it then. And that was within, let's call it the Ministry of Defence, the defence industries. And I emerged from the top of that conveyor as a kind of graduate management trainee in engineering, so on the engineering fast stream. Now back then, although it's great that the Cold War has ended and we're not going to be nuked, around that, up until about 1989, the government employed hundreds of thousands of engineers. There was something like, I'm guessing, I can't remember exactly, there's something like 15 major research and development establishments. Now, and I did some of my training in those, and then after a while I moved out of the civil service, went to work for a company called Plessey. Now Plessey then they got swallowed up into part of British Aerospace and part of Siemens. Plessey then employed 35,000 people, all in engineering type roles. There was GC with 70,000 people. There was other companies like Ferranti, Marconi, and so on. Now many of those are kind of long dead, or they've been gobbled up by other organisations. But I remember being on the milk round where I was interviewing students, and we were told, in Plessey, that we could not reject any potential graduate or any numerate graduate at first interview, because Plessey could probably take the entire output of the UK universities. And we had some most improbable things. I'll just give you one story. A guy said to me, I'm doing a study in ecology, the life of earthworms. Can I get a job with Plessey? And I said, absolutely, certainly, you can get a job with Plessey. Now, he probably didn't get one, but I wasn't allowed to say, you've got to be kidding. I had to, and there's another one. I won't make this too long, but there's another one where somebody's mother, she was East German. Well, of course, back in the day, you didn't tend to employ people from East Germany or Russia on UK defence work. And he said, well, my mother's East German. Do you think that would be a problem? Certainly not. Sign here. So they would have gone off to some Plessey subsidiary. So I'm just painting a picture of what it was like then, how lucky we were. When I graduated in 81 with a telecoms degree, there was such a, because of the Cold War, there were just hundreds of thousands of engineering jobs with the government. So I'm quite an opportunist myself. Some people, they want to be the world's best engineer. They want to be the world's best expert on aircraft wing design or whatever it is. I only saw it as a means to an end. I'm a bit like, I'm doing this today. This opportunity floats by. Well, I'll jump on that conveyor and I'll jump on that conveyor. So, no apologies. I've always been a bit of a careerist. So, I very quickly moved on. I did about 3 years of actual real engineering as a system design engineer, but then I figured out there was a bit more money to be made as a project manager, and then went on to senior engineering positions. So I was a member of the IET, so a chartered engineer, when I was 26, and I was a fellow when I was 37, I think. So I stayed in various kind of aspects of defence. Never offensive. I was never making things to kill people. It was only communications and IT stuff, to be clear. But this sort of moved on until I was about 40. So that's my first kind of 23 years. I got a great opportunity to take my family to live in Hong Kong for 2 years. Now, it depends what floats your boat, but for me, the chance to take wife and 5 children, all expenses paid, to live in a massive house, near a beach, on Hong Kong Island, to have a job that I could walk to work, which finished at 4 p.m. and I spent the rest of the time in the swimming pool, was pretty nice. So that was something that engineering allowed me to do. So I was chief engineer of a particular organisation out there linked to the UK government. But I suppose I figured out, well, what am I going to do if all these kids I've got go to university? I'll never be able to afford it. And around that time, the dot-com boom was really building up. So it was like an industrial revolution of computer technology. Companies then, it's a sort of like the bubble you're seeing today around Apple and Microsoft and people like that. So companies that were trading at £3 a share, within 2 years were trading at £30 a share on a PE, if you know what PE is, a price earnings ratio of 70, when they deserved about 20. And they were recruiting people like crazy. So I came out of, I thought, well, I need a bit of this money. And I got a good network. I'd managed a really large contract with a big then IT services company called Logica. They're now CGI, I think. They were bought out by a Canadian company. And I'd got a friend there, and I saw an advert. Those days, job adverts were in the Times, the good ones. None of this, Indeed stuff. I said, hey, are these jobs real? What the salaries they're offering, are they real? And he said, yeah, leave it with me. So a couple of very casual interviews. I met a guy in a pub somewhere off the M4, and I thought, this is going to be a tough interview. And I sat there, and one of the tricks in interviews is to figure out who's selling. So if you've got like a job situation, you don't know if they're desperate for you or you're more desperate for them. So I always say to my kids, figure out who's selling. So I started to talk about what I'd done and whatever, and very quickly I worked out he was selling to me. So I just kept my mouth shut. And the job offer came through, and it was something like double my salary. So we've moved around a lot. So I moved from the West Country to Fleet in Hampshire to be within reach of London, but we left one of our kids behind. So we wanted somewhere about halfway along that M4 corridor. And so when I got a job with Logica, because it's a sort of a consulting style company, you think, right, I've got a job. Where's my desk? Where's my job? Where's my staff? And my boss said, I forgot you were coming. Clear those papers off that desk there. You can sit there today. And then start going around the divisions and see if they've got any work for you. Brackets, if they don't have any work for you, mate, you probably need to be looking for another job. And it's like, ugh. So I went round several, and I eventually ended up in energy and utilities. And it was around the time of the deregulation and creating the market for energy. And there were massive projects, basically moving from state-run energy services like the gas board and all that to this sort of working on energy trading. So I met the head of the division, and he said, we've got this massive opportunity to win this big deal with Transco. It was the people who run the National Gas Network. And I said, fine, do you ever bid these jobs? And he said, yeah, we bid them all the time. I said, do you ever win any? He said, no. Anyway, we won. We won. And for that, the chief executive of Logica, and that was a FTSE 100 company, sent my daughter, who was 18, to Paris for a month, all expenses paid. And she had her 18th birthday at the top of the Eiffel Tower. So not the entire thing, just that day she went to the top of the Eiffel Tower with some friends, all expenses paid for. And you think, engineering got me that, and networking. Anyway, the contract didn't go all that well, and it was going to get sticky, and they decided to let somebody else have a go. I blame the client myself. And so I got this phone call from the managing director of Logica. Well, yes, and he said, hi, Paul, it's a shame about that big contract, but we're not going to fire you. We've got something going on in Japan. Do you think you could take a look at it? And I said, yeah, sure. I could go out there for a couple of weeks and have a look. And he said, I thought we might send you for a bit longer than that. So about 10 minutes after he called me, I said, okay. And then the finance director of Logica called me and said, Paul, we don't want you to resign. We'd like you to go out to Japan. And I went, yeah, well, I've heard that. And then and then about 10 minutes later, the head of HR phoned me and said, hello, Paul, we don't want you to resign. I said, look, that's the third guy. And he said, well, that's why they're paid so much more than me. So off we went, and I took my wife and two of our kids to Tokyo for 2 years, and left three of them behind. And the three girls I left behind were 16, 17 and 18. And all of their friends' parents thought we were loopy, and all of their friends thought we were great. So that's where we get to there. So I'm just checking my notes to see if there's anything that I've said on here. So anyway, some highlights. You know about Hong Kong. You know about Japan. I love jobs. I'm not a completer finisher. I'm a shaper. I like to take suicide missions, and they would say, when I was asked to go to Hong Kong, I said, why are you asking me to go to Hong Kong? Not the obvious choice. And the guy said, we've asked everybody else. And everybody else said no. And I said, I'll do it. Because you always get more leverage, right? You get more money, you get more leverage, because they're desperate and they're losing money on their contracts or whatever. And you always live through it. It's often hard, but you always live through it. And luckily for me, my wife was kind of a bit like, well, where's next? She doesn't say that now, but she used to say that. So I'm going to kind of bring it to an end because I've given you a flavour of it. I mean, I think my last role I ended up working for BT by accident. I worked for somebody and they took over BT. So I wouldn't have necessarily worked for a kind of national telco. But my last job for them I ended up as a contracts director managing contracts with banks. So I won't mention the names of the banks, but the last contract I was running was about 400 million. And then I took the package and left. So final words, because I'm going to talk my friends out if I'm not careful. Theme again, network. It was probably, I was about 35 when I figured out that the world didn't exist exactly as it was in my head, particularly as I was a technical person. To me, everything's driven by logic, because I'm extremely logic-driven and task-focused. So that's not how the rest of the world really works. So understanding that is really key. So try and think about that whole picture. I think as you move on in your career and you get more senior, then controlling your emotions is really important. You often find the most senior people are the most mildest. And it's not because they're naturally mildest, they still shout at, when they're in the pub they still shout, but they control their emotions because it gives them a natural kind of authority in situations, and it takes a lot of effort. Unless you're naturally like that, it takes a lot of effort to control emotions. Timing, I learned the skill of timing. So if you're in a relationship, or even maybe with your parents, you naturally choose to give them bad news on timing that suits you. Now it's the same in office relationships or careers. So when I was younger, I would always say whatever's in my head comes out of my mouth. But over the years, I learned saying a little or deciding what to say and then timing it, letting other people absorb the first bit of the message, more timing, let them absorb the next bit of the message. It's surprising what you can get people to do if you can do that. And then finally, I'd say one trick I use is I think of people as customers. So right now I'm thinking of you as customers. And now there might be somebody, I'm not going to point at anybody in particular, there might be somebody over there who's asleep now, who's not paying attention. But I'm not going to allow myself to think badly of that person, because if I think, God, what a waste, here am I, experience of a lifetime and the guy's asleep. If I think that will show on my face. If it shows on my face, it'll turn the other person off. So even you could have the dumbest customer, or you could be working for a boss who you really don't like at all. But that technique I used was to always think of them as a customer, and never allow myself to think, God, what a waste, I could do this job 5 times better than him or her. Yeah? So that's me. I'm going to stop at that point. Sorry, I've probably taken...
I wasn't asleep, Paul.
Far too much of your time. Okay. Thank you very much. You don't have to clap, honestly. I enjoy doing this. I'll move on to you.
I learned Paul's lesson about networking far, far earlier than he did.
I knew that. I could tell, just look at him. You can tell he's a natural networker. I'll get out of the way.
My mum and dad ran the village pub in Herworth. Herworth's about 50 miles north of here on the way to Darlington. And I learned a lesson about networking the hardware. And I started off in an apprenticeship in Cummins Engines. And like Paul, I applied for the apprenticeship and got the job. Thought this was great. My college years were going to be paid for and all the rest of it. I think this is spot on. First year you do ONC at Darlington College of Technology, as it was at the time. So I went to Darlington College of Technology. First year, I'm not like Paul, comprehensive school, not academically gifted at all. Get to the end of my year, I've got 3 merits and 2 passes. I was so proud of that. I went back home, said to my dad, I've got 3 merits and 2 passes. And my dad said, yeah, I already know. And I went, how do you already know? He said, hang on. And he goes in his paper and he gets a bit of paper out in his pocket. And he said, I want to know where you were on the 18th of October, on the 25th of January. And I'm thinking, where are all these dates coming from? And there was about 4 dates. And it dawned on me quite quickly. And I thought, I bunked off college those days. And he says, so I knew you had your merits, and where were you on those dates? And I went, I bunked off college. He said, I know that. I said, how do you know that? And he said, come downstairs, son. And they went downstairs into the bar, and there was my head of year from Cummins Engine Company and the head of year from college sat having a beer at the table together. And I hadn't got the job on my own account. And every time I bunked off college, my dad already knew. And I thought, this isn't good. I need to get out of this village. This is really bad. And so I would have been 19 at that point. I thought, I need to buy a house and I need to move out. And I left Cummins. I'll go slightly on to topic now. I left Cummins and got my own job at BSA Foundries, because Foundries quite often went to Cummins as have you got any apprentices that actually want a proper job? And that was how I started. But of course, you couldn't do degree at university like you guys have the opportunity. So I continued my ONC, finished my HNC, and then I was off to go and do day release at Sheffield University when they pulled the course because there wasn't enough numbers, and that left me high and dry. So I started my degree through the OU, and it was probably the best thing I ever did, because what I got when my degree opened up was a whole bunch of opportunities, following Paul's logic again on opportunities, that I would never have had if I never got my degree. The first one I applied for, I'd done quite well at my job, and then I'd moved on and I was in sales. So again, I'd learned the other lesson, and one of the other lessons that Paul had said, I was quite good at selling the dream and leaving others to deliver the nightmare. So at that point, I ended up realising quite quickly that degree had given me lots of opportunities. I was never going to get materials testing. Materials testing was great, but the pay was rubbish, and it was time to look elsewhere. So I ended up in the rail industry, and this is 1999, so I think I start my career at this point. And I've got 20 years of experience in the rail industry, and that's from a sales point of view, from a project management point of view, project delivery point of view, and an engineering point of view. So I've got quite a varied role in railways. I've been involved in innovation projects, and Jake and some of the others here have seen some of the innovations that we've done in my time in Network Rail, which was a great part of my career, because it really wasn't work, it was just playing with toys, to be honest. So I quite enjoy doing innovations, but I think what I've got is experience of everything from idea conception to project initiation, through to scoping, project control, documentation, contracting, delivery, implementation, and ultimately benefits realisation. So within railways I've done quite a bit. So I'll go back to 1999, got a job in what was BR Research, British Rail Research, a bit ingrained in the old British Railways, and it had recently been privatised, so Railtrack was in existence, and these guys had to find their own opportunities. And they weren't familiar with this, because these were engineers that were hidden in, out of plain sight for quite a while, and now they were trying to find their way in a commercial marketplace, which I had all the skills for from what I'd learned in materials testing. It was fantastic. We did some great projects at that time, back in those days. In railway terms, I'll mention some of them. You might not have heard of them. I'll probably, unless you're a buff, you won't. Our team built a new measurement train, which is the foremost network rail inspection train that's out there. It's often called the Flying Banana. They still call it new. It wasn't new 20 years ago. It didn't have any new technology at all. All we did was recycle what was there already. But the word new in the title confuses everybody, and everybody's fallen for that one. They put some new stuff on it since, but it was 20 years ago. So we built lots of new stuff, and it coincided with what was happening at the time. And what happened at the time at this point was Hatfield had happened, where a train had come off the tracks at Hatfield on a curve because the rail disintegrated underneath it. And at this point, Potter's Bar had just happened as well, which is where the train came off at a piece of S&C just north of Potter's Bar. And that was principally because the S&C wasn't maintained. Railway was very fragmented at the time, and that was really the problem statement. So engineering, innovation and examination had been created within what was now Network Rail. Railtrack was disbanded, and the opportunity was clearly there. These guys were going to revolutionise inspection, maintenance, and the operation of the railway and how it ran, and ultimately to get track quality back to an acceptable level. And EI&E were given best part of £500 million budget, and it was very clear that this was a great place to work for a few years. They were going to spend a lot of money very quickly, and it was driven by the government at the time, and it was a great place to work. The opportunity was there. So I did that for the best part of 7 years. And as I say, we built new measurement train, we implemented rail ultrasonics, we'd implemented grinding, which had stopped rail grinding, which had started cracks, which ultimately, protected rail integrity. And from a bit of background and a bit of sales skill, a bit of metallurgical background and a few sales skills, it was a great place to be. Never rose the ranks of what Paul did, but it was a great place as a technical sales engineer, and that was what I did until 2007. I was working for what BR Research, become IET Technology Rail, and IET Technology Rail had gone through the doldrums because it had its own financial problems, and you could see that the end of the writing was on the wall. It was time to find something else. And because I'd been working with Sterling on a few projects, I knew Sterling owned Omnicom locally. It was a rail technology company, and he was struggling for commercial resource. It was an obvious thing, and what Paul said again, who was selling to who here? My interview lasted about 30 seconds. How much do you want? When can you start? Right, brilliant, see you Monday. And that was my interview. It wasn't in the pub though, and that's probably where I went wrong on that one, I think. So I should have started something else as well. I grew up in Middlesbrough, got away from Middlesbrough to get away from college. My company moved me to Dudley. I never got Hong Kong. Dudley was the real short straw. BR Research moved me back to Derby, which wasn't much better, but I actually lived in the Peak District, and that was a bit of an improvement. So aspirational levels were going up again. So just as I move from Dudley to the Peak District, I then get a job in York, and I'm back commuting, driving up and down from York whenever I'm needed. That lasted for about 2 years. Omnicom, we had a great start, got some good contracts in, so that got the ball rolling very quickly, a couple of £1 million plus, which for a small company, I'd gone from a company with 1,200 employees to 30, so culture was different, organisation was different, responsibilities were different, so whereas in technical sales executive role, you were doing quite a bit of swanning about, it was easy, everything at Omnicom was my responsibility or mine and Sterling's, and suddenly this was a whole level of, suddenly the penny hit, I've got to do something here. So I got the ball rolling quite quickly, got a few fairly big contracts in, kept the walls from the door, and then we built from there. And the time at Omnicom, I think it was pretty successful, so I'm putting in all the governance structure that we need in a company that's going to turn over £5 million a year. We put in the roles and responsibilities, we put in the financial and auditing procedures, and we won the contract for plain line pattern recognition. So if anyone knows what that is, you're techie in the rail industry. For those that don't, which I'm assuming is everybody, is previous to PLPR, people used to go out and walk the track every night, gang of two, walk and look for defects with the torch. And what PLPR was, a series of cameras and lasers fastened to an engineering train that would run over it, record miles and miles of images every night. Software automatically looked at the images, determined whether there was defects, and any defects that the software automatically determined were flagged up to an inspector who was sat at a desk, who was probably one of the track walkers, now had to find another job, and sat at the desk and went yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and accepted the defects that were there. And I believe they're still building systems now, long after I've left. Problem was, after 6 years at Omnicom, it was all on an even keel, and a bit like Paul, I'm not a completer finisher. This felt like it was in steady away mode and I wasn't needed anymore. So I was a victim of my own success and the writing was on the wall again, and at which point I had an opportunity to go self-employed and actually instead of selling other companies to Network Rail and go and sell myself. So I thought this was a great idea and I'm going to make loads of cash, and it worked quite well for a bit. So I left Omnicom, set up my own company, sold myself to Network Rail, and instantly I was in contract to NR as a delivery lead in an innovation programme with a £4 million budget to develop new processes and equipment to help deliver resignaling schemes. Resignaling schemes are pretty complex and they're pretty safety critical. So trying to speed them up is tricky because everyone goes, oh no, you can't do it that way. And we built all sorts of stuff. We built software for developing and managing signal sighting forms on, so that drivers can see signals, which is pretty important. We built software and tools for identifying where assets were in the railway. So we built software and we implemented Omnicom's system to, cameras on front of trains, go through the resignaling renewal patch, identify all the assets, the location of them from the video, and then print out their as-is railway in a nice spreadsheet for them to start from. There was about 10 or 12 projects, £4 million, and that kept me busy for about 5 years. And it was quite lucrative at the beginning, but then government red tape got in the row. You were there bothered about tax returns and taxation and process and compliance and liabilities and all of this. I'll go self-employed, it'll be great, it'll be really exciting, I'll only have myself to look, and I'm now way down in my own accounts, and I'm thinking, this isn't quite what I signed up to here. IR35 had kicked in, so the rules had changed, and it was no longer that lucrative, so that's time to go and get another job. However, during this point, I'd learned things about project initiation, project management, and I'd learned about how Network Rail's project methodologies and approaches worked, and I got picked up by Network Rail Design Delivery as a senior design engineer for requirements. This sounds quite fun. I thought, I'll learn a bit here. I'll write requirements for railway enhancement projects. Boy, how wrong was that? Because what I realised is to write requirements for enhancement projects, you need to know every single discipline on the railway. You need to know about how track's built, how it's maintained, how drainage works. You need to know how signalling schemes work. You need to know how bridges are built. And the learning curve was just vertical. And then, so I was doing some quite interesting projects, like twin tracking the railway between Leamington Spa and Coventry, and knocking down all the bridges and building new, twin track bridges that could cope with the twin track railway, either going over them or under them, and learning about railway operations to see how much the benefits would be and supporting the benefits case. And Birmingham Airport project was quite a good opportunity to learn quickly on what requirements and specifications for a new railway look like. Then my line manager, who was a bit geographically challenged, said, stop working on Birmingham, it's too far away, I'll put you on Crewe. And if you ever go to Crewe, you realise that Birmingham's easy, it's 2 hours, it's a single direct train, and if you go to Crewe, you change at Manchester and it's 2.5 hours. So Crewe was further away than Birmingham. Crewe is also, it's the hub where HS2 arrives in HS2 Phase 2A, and then under HS2 Phase 2B it tunnels under Crewe and goes to Manchester. So then I learned what I thought I'd learned. Everything from Birmingham Airport suddenly became much harder because Crewe Hub it's a signalling renewals programme, and it's fairly substantial. It's the biggest signalling renewals programme in the northwest over the next 10 years. That's one part of it. The next part of it is a new track layout at Crewe to incorporate the increased number of trains from HS2 and the increased length of trains of HS2 because they're 400 metres long. My suggestion of moving Manchester 20 metres to the north went down badly because that was a bit expensive, because it means that the gap between the North Junction and South Junction and Crewe is too small. So if we just moved Manchester to the north, we could increase the length of Crewe. Didn't go down so well. HS2 refused to pay for that. So we've got the track layout to do at Crewe, we've got the station to do at Crewe, we've got the renewals programme, then you've got to build a new spur for HS2 to arrive on and move our tracks apart so that HS2 have platforms 5 and 6 at Crewe. Then you've got the re-signalling to allow HS2 to arrive because their signalling's ETCS and ours is conventional red lights and green lights. And then you've got the operations and the fact that HS2 don't have any drivers. So that's pretty fundamental to it as well. And that's what I'm currently doing. And I'm still writing contracts and requirements documents for Crewe. And then at that point, because I've done so much for HS2, they've realised that I'm quite a decent egg. The network kicks in again, leave Network Rail in February, and I'm joining WSP, one of HS2's contractors, in March to do more of the same. So that's my background, that's what I've done in my railway career, and I've quite enjoyed it, because I think if the one thing I was going to say, enjoyment is everything, because if you don't enjoy it, you won't have the enthusiasm you need to do it, and if you don't enjoy it, go and find something else to do, would be my advice. Lewis next.
Is Lewis there? Hello.
There he is.
Yeah, I've been listening. I enjoyed this. Thank you. Thanks, Paul and Neil. So I'm Lewis Garfield. I'm a senior electronics engineer at a company called Analox up near Middlesbrough, as Stokesley, just in North Yorkshire, only just in North Yorkshire. So a bit of background for me. I finished my degree at the University of Derby in 2010. It was actually in music technology and audio system design. It was a Bachelor of Science. And I had the intentions of going into that sort of audio equipment design or recording studios, or as like a sound engineer, a sound technician. There wasn't really any jobs like that for me at the time. It just didn't. It was, I suppose, after 2008 and the crash and things. So I was unemployed for about 6 months after uni. But I don't think that should be your fate now. There's a lot of high demand for engineers all over the place. Also, I did have a bit of an issue around because my degree wasn't specifically like electrical electronic engineering. Some people didn't really know what content was in there. It covered all sorts of things: embedded systems, C and C++ programming, bit of assembler as well. There was all the recording studio stuff as well, but there was quite a lot of technical content. And my final year project was I designed and built an analog noise gate with some frequency filtering on the front end. So out of it, that I managed to get a graduate job in Manchester with a company called Multi-Sensor Systems. Very small company spun out of Manchester University. They developed water quality analyzers. So my dad and my brother are in instrumentation, mainly oil and gas. But so they had a big they helped me move more towards an industrial sort of job rather than the audio world I was sort of originally looking at. But I did find that I had a lot of the technical skills that I needed, and an understanding of, okay, it's not a microphone, an amplifier, and a speaker, but it's a sensor, some logic processing, and an output stage. So there's a lot of crossover, I suppose, a lot of the fundamentals. So we made analyzers that detected oil in water, river intakes. I would sometimes go out and service and commission those as well. That was nice in summertime, but not very nice in winter by the side of the river. But I got a few trips abroad as well, to Germany and the US to commission systems out there. I helped set up a lot of the manufacturing side of things as well, because they were starting to ramp up, but they were struggling with their current manufacturer, which was a contracted out sort of company. I helped develop work instructions and build procedures, clarifying the bill of materials, which was critical in keeping configuration management and control over the build state. Worked there for about 3 years, and then I was looking for progression, and there wasn't really any. I was the most junior member, and a lot of the jobs just kept coming my way, which was great for learning, but after a while, I knew I needed that step up. So when I had a look around, I was free. I was open to moving anywhere in the UK, really. And I'm from East Yorkshire originally, so when a job came up Middlesbrough way, I was like, oh well, I could live in York and commute there, which is what I do. I live in York. Luckily now I can work from home a bit more, which means I can save that hour each way on the commute. I'm enjoying that. The Analogs make, so I've been there for about 8 years now. We make gas detection systems for a range of industries: military, commercial diving, food and beverage, some space applications as well. Anywhere where you've got a confined space and you need to measure the gases, whether they're the level of oxygen or some toxic gases, carbon dioxide, monoxide. We've got some very specialist equipment on submarines, military submarines really. making sure that the air is breathable, doesn't breach any of the regulations for exposure limits for the patrols and things like that. So, like Paul said, military application, but saving lives, not on the weapons end of things. So I feel ethically, I mean, not that there's anything wrong with going into that world. If I know it's all necessary, but it's just not for me. I actually have specialised a bit in functional safety. So there's a family of standards, IEC 61508. You'll get to learn a lot of standard numbers, unfortunately, if you go into the military world, especially. I'm sure the medical world is similar as well. But that family of standards you set, the automotive industry has its own as well, but a SIL rating is a safety integrity level, and it goes 1 to 4, and 4 being the hardest to achieve. And it's all about probability of failure and a dangerous failure occurring that's undetected is the worst, obviously, scenario. That's the worst case scenario. So trying to mitigate that through redundancy diagnostics, making sure the hardware and software have been analysed and understood, that you've minimised the chances of a random failure or a systematic failure reaching the end user as a hazard. I've worked my way up with analogs as well. I started as an electronics engineer, and now I look after the electronics hardware team. So it's quite a small team. It's just one other engineer and a technician. I've had other engineers and apprentices work for me over the years as well. But we've got a separate software team, because although I can write a little bit of software, I can't do it to the same standard that those guys can. The unit testing and just kind of one of the guys worked for Microsoft for a long time, and he, just looking at the quality of his code, he doesn't need to comment the code. You can understand it just from reading. It's really something. It's great learning from people like that when you can just see their experience in action. But I try and I'm not as interested in software. I'm more interested in hardware design. We use a package called OrCAD, Cadence OrCAD. So I do schematic capture, PCB layout. I do failure modes and effects analysis, and other sort of, not so much on the simulation, but prototyping and simulating parts of my circuit maybe before we implement it. A lot of productionization, making sure that we can build these things. And EMC, so electromagnetic compatibility, that's quite challenging in the military world especially. I found that recently. I did some pre-compliance testing, which is where we just had a prototype and trying it out in the chambers. But I made the mistake of testing it under some industrial standard setup. By the time I got to the military chamber, which costs a lot more to go and get time there, so I thought I was saving money by going into the industrial chamber. But in the end, those results didn't really mean very much, because it was, the configuration wasn't right. I recently became chartered, and I was just going to finish by just quickly showing you. You have to present something. Oh, can you all see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was incorporated first. I thought I did it as a stepping stone. Not everyone does it that way, but I was under the impression you needed a master's. But over the years, I realised that you can build up a case for have enough understanding that's the equivalent of someone with a master's degree. That I've built up over 10 years so far in my career. But I went for IET a few years ago, and then I've recently been given my chartership, which is great. But I had to present a few of the projects that I led all of these projects as the lead engineer. So I was bringing together the mechanical, software, electronic hardware, and being the technical point of contact for the project manager. So I did a functionally safe oxygen analyzer. In fact, maybe if I do that might be a bit, yeah, that's a bit better. So it's got some sensors. There's a voting algorithm on the 3 oxygen sensors, 2 out of 3, so that we can allow for some failure. One of them can fail, and we still know you can vote that one out and continue with your safety functions, which in this case is a high-going oxygen alarm that's looking for flammability risk, oxygen enrichment, and then a low-going partial pressure oxygen alarm, which is for suffocation risk. If the oxygen gets too low, of course, as you all know, that's going to be a problem. But the pressure inside a submarine can change quite a bit, so you want to remove the percent volume aspects isn't as critical at that point. You're looking for the actual amount of oxygen that's present. So there is a pressure sensor on there to calculate the percentage of oxygen that's present for the flammability, but we use partial pressure for the low-going alarm. There's a flow sensor, making sure that we are actually getting gas flow through this thing. This sits within a larger system that provides a gas sample, so there isn't a pump in here or anything. It's delivered and then exhausted through the manifold. 3 safety relays with feedback on the contacts, making sure that they're okay. Some calibration functionality and status buttons, etc. So yeah, a few things there, and I used that one for my high-end application, so that was a while ago, but still supporting that product today. This is a diving industry unit, so this one was, instead of a microcontroller like on the other one, this was a microprocessor, an NXP processor running an embedded version of Windows. Got your display, the rotary encoder, some buttons and toggle switches, etc. I had some issues, weirdly, with my degree. You'd have thought the audio part I'd have nailed that, but I actually had some difficulty using. Effectively, I used this switching power supply and a Class D amplifier, which is a switching type of audio amplifier, and the two of those just didn't work. They didn't work well together. They really, the Class D amplifier is for more like a battery-powered device, which I should have really known that. But I had a lot of issues with my first few goes at that, and then switched to an AB type amplifier, and all the audio noise went. There's a little speaker for feedback from the user interface and stuff. I helped with a lot of the operating system and board support package configuration. So the software team dealt with most of that, but I was helping them with showing the pin map for it's a system on chip card, or system on module, I think probably is more, system on module card that, just effectively draw all of those pins out for the Ethernet, USB, any other interfaces, the LCD display, etc. on the board there. That was quite good. Enjoyed that project. And in the diving industry, in the saturation diving industry, that's for like oil and gas, they'll want to measure a range of different gases, and we provide a sensor and a display for each one so that they can individually calibrate them and have a nice sort of panel of information of what's going on inside the dive chamber or the dive bell. And they'll sort of mark up on the panel which location that display is for. It's maybe a bit outdated now. There are some newer and nicer systems that I don't know if we're going to continue in that market as strongly as we have done in the past. We're doing a lot more military stuff recently, but I'd like to do more of that stuff. This is my latest one. It's another submarine product that effectively if it's for a distressed submarine, so a submarine that's sunk to the bottom of the ocean, a dis-sub situation, if they sink below about 100 meters of seawater, the chances of survival and rescue are barely there. So it's not a nice product. Effectively, it's a product that we've designed and built and will manufacture, but we hope no one ever has to use it. So it's a bit of an odd one. But we've still thought about the user and the situation that they'd be in, the stress of that situation would be horrible. So it's as simple as it can be. It's just a backlight function, a power on. It'll last about 10 days on its batteries. So that was a bit of a challenge, again, making sure it could be low power enough that 4D cell batteries would survive that long. It's an STM32 microcontroller, but it's like a specially designed low power one that we've used some of those low power features. Measures the oxygen, carbon dioxide, depth, pressure, temperature and humidity, and the days remaining, or hours remaining, of battery life. And it can also count the amount of time they've been down there, elapsed time, because it's a decision-making tool, really. Like, if the depth isn't that bad and they've been down there a little while, there's a few things they can do. There's a thing called an oxygen candle that it effectively is a chemical process that produces loads of oxygen. So they burn this thing and it'll produce more oxygen. They've got carbon dioxide scrubbers to keep the air breathable for as long as possible. But they've got limited resources, and it depends how the submarine's gone down and which compartments are flooded, and what pressure depth they're at. They might choose to escape. They might choose to. Ideally, they would choose to wait for rescue, so that something can come along, connect, and depressurize them slowly. Because anyone returning to the surface after being submerged for that amount of time, they could suffer from the bends or decompression sickness. There's a lot of risks, basically, and it's again horrible situation that I hope no one has to find themselves in. But yeah, again, had some EMC issues around the CO2 sensor, especially with with this military testing. Had to be IP67 as well, which is like a effectively watertight down to a meter depth, just in case a compartment flooded, but they were still able to get access to this thing if it was locked in a cabinet, and they could still get it even if it had been underwater for a little while. Yeah, that's me, really. Hope that was interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much, Liz, for that. We might as well just move straight onto the Q&A bit. So if anyone has any questions for our panel at all, to find out obviously about their industry, their experience and all that sort of stuff, then anyone got any questions at all to ask? Just put your hand up. Yeah, if you've got a question, just put your hand up, but I don't think anyone's got. Anyone got any questions? Yep.
Paul, the management and sort of project management stuff you talked about, I guess it's a different set of skills from engineering and tech focus. How do you find kind of marrying like table skills with tech stuff? Is it something you learn as part of training, or is it something you learn on the job?
It's okay. Basically, a lot of the project management skills are in your DNA. So, because of the nature of it, the skill set you need to be able to plan, to coordinate, all those things, the highly social things and structured things. So, technical people can project manage. There's no doubt about it. You can learn those skills, but it definitely comes more naturally to some than others. So it depends on your DNA, how easily you can make that crossover. Is that a brief answer, but is that okay?
Yeah. I guess when you're kind of looking for those roles, so how do you demonstrate that that's something you're good at? It depends. It depends. It's a
I'm trying to avoid a long answer, okay? Quite often, if you're working in an organisation, they'll choose you. So there are always people thinking about who are we going to put on this next project or whatever. And they watch people and they'll go, aha, that person thinks they're an engineer, but really I think they're a project manager. And this is happening to my son at the moment, where he's going, I'm absolutely never going to be a project manager, I just want to be an engineer. And they're going, okay, fine, yeah. Will you just take a look at this and tell us when this can be completed and tell us what resources you need and maybe how much it's going to cost? Yeah, as long as you understand I'm only an engineer, I'm not a project manager. Yeah. Oh, will you just chair that meeting for us with the client? Yes, okay. So sometimes if it's kind of like open competition, you've got to know, you've got to say, well, I've got a qualification in Prince 2 and I can tick all these boxes. If it's like that sort of thing. But quite often it evolves. You're in a certain setting, a new contract comes in. Crikey, somebody's got to run this contract. Who have we got? Well, we haven't got the ideal person, but we have got somebody who's got the basic skills. Let's take them. Short answer. Trying to keep it short answer.
I'll keep my answer short from my experience as well. Is that one of the PM questions that I've seen asked at an interview is, how will you deal with this situation? And they'll give you a technical situation to deal with. And the correct answer is, I wouldn't. I'm the PM. I'll get my engineer in to come and deal with that bit, and I'll get my security guy to come in and deal with that bit, and I'll get this guy in, and that's the correct answer. Because if you go into solutions mode as a PM, you're dead in the water.
Yeah.
That was my short answer.
Thank you.
I was wondering, you guys sort of jumped around jobs quite a bit, but you often talked about coming to the end of you felt you needed to go. How do you know when you're in the best position to move? What are you looking for? Especially when you talk about the bubbles.
Go on, you go first.
Yeah, I was going to say I'll go first.
Yeah, you go first.
And I think I want to say something that Paul said in his presentation. I never planned my career out in any way, shape or thing. It happened. Right? And then sometimes I might have been a passenger and sometimes I might have been a driver. And your question is, how do you decide whether you're the passenger or the driver? And I think Paul also touched on look at the bigger picture and keep an eye on what's happening. And I think that's how I decided. You can tell when the writing's on the wall. I can at the moment for Network Rail, because all of a sudden, instead of doing things itself, it's literally everything gets farmed out. There's only one way that's going. Right? I can see that. I could tell when it was Omnicom that everything was done and all the problems I'd had had been brought in to solve were solved, and that there was really not much I was contributing anymore. And I have to be a contributor. If I'm not contributing, I'm out of there. And I think that would be my answer at that point.
I think as well, people move for many reasons. They often move because they're dissatisfied where they are. And if you think you're being underpaid by 50%, there can be. You can sometimes move just to put bread on the table, like my story about putting my kids through uni. Luckily, only one of them went, and I saved lots of money. It can be that, like survival. What is it? Maslow's triangle of needs. The first thing you need is oxygen, and the next thing is so on. But sometimes it's just pure dissatisfaction. Sometimes somebody rings you up, cold call. It's all those things, really. So sometimes it creeps up on you. You're just getting more and more fed up, and you see an opportunity you think will be right for you. And other times it just comes from nowhere. Yeah, Lewis.
Sorry, I agree with that. I think I know it's already mentioned before that enjoyment's a big part of it. You'll know yourself if you're just not enjoying things anymore. And it depends what motivates you. Yeah, I mean, I've never been afraid to ask for more money when the time comes. Like if I just have a brief look at the marketplace and see what's available. At the moment, recruiters are sending me a lot of stuff because there's a shortage. But I know that I'm on about the right salary for what I'm doing. So, and that's because I've proactively talked to my manager about it. I know a lot of engineers, a lot of people generally, they don't like those conversations and they find them awkward. But I think you're only doing yourself a disservice not talking about it, because a good manager will ask that question and understand your own situation and what you're looking for, and maybe have some development or progression plan in place. But some managers just want to get on with the day-to-day, and they won't really talk about the future as much. And the first time they find out you're unhappy is when you hand your notice in, and that's bad news for them. But I would just say baseline yourself and benchmark, and don't be afraid to ask for a pay rise when you think you've earned it. And,
Good managers are thin on the ground, by the way. You won't come across many in your career. I promise you that.
Absolutely true. Yeah. Somebody once said to me, "A good manager is worth £1 million."
Yeah.
Maybe not literally, but that's the sense of it. Okay.
Any more questions at all? Thank you very much again. I think a round of applause as well, just for our two. Welcome to the IET